History has shown us time and again that human civilization is vulnerable, not just to natural disasters, but also to the failures of politics, institutions, and decision-making. In Doom, The Politics of Catastrophe, Niall Ferguson explores the complex interplay between catastrophe and governance, asking why societies often fail to respond effectively to crises, and what lessons we can learn from past disasters. Ferguson combines historical case studies, economic analysis, and political insight to demonstrate that catastrophes, from plagues and famines to financial collapses and pandemics, reveal the strengths and weaknesses of institutions and leadership. The book examines both the failures and successes of human response, offering a sobering perspective on our ability to anticipate, mitigate, and recover from disaster. Doom challenges readers to confront uncomfortable truths that political agendas, institutional inertia, and cognitive biases often hinder effective action, and that learning from history is essential to avoid repeating catastrophic mistakes. This summary will guide you through Ferguson's key insights into the nature of disasters, the role of politics, and the lessons we must internalize to better navigate crises in our own time. If you are ready to explore the forces that shape human vulnerability, understand the political dynamics behind disasters, and learn how history can guide better decision-making, subscribe to Read and Rise, support the channel, and join us as we uncover books that illuminate the patterns of history and the consequences of human action. Because understanding catastrophe is not just about surviving, it's about learning, adapting, and preparing for the future. First, the first major idea in Doom is that catastrophes are inevitable, but human vulnerability determines their impact. Niall Ferguson emphasizes that disasters, whether natural, technological, or financial, expose the limits of our preparation, institutions, and leadership. Ferguson identifies several key factors that make societies particularly vulnerable. 1. Complex systems and interdependence. Modern societies are deeply interconnected. A failure in one sector, like finance, energy, or public health, can cascade rapidly, amplifying the impact of a disaster. 2. Political and institutional failures. Governments often fail to act decisively, either due to bureaucratic inertia, political self-interest, or underestimating risks. History shows that even well-resourced nations can collapse or suffer devastating consequences when leadership falters. 3. Cognitive and social biases. Human psychology plays a role. Denial, wishful thinking, and delayed response often exacerbate crises. People tend to underprepare for rare but high-impact events, leaving societies exposed. For viewers, the takeaway is sobering. Disasters are not just acts of nature, they are also social and political phenomena. The impact of any catastrophe is determined as much by human decisions, policies, and societal structure as by the event itself. Understanding these dynamics is the first step towards preventing avoidable suffering and preparing for crises more effectively. This first idea naturally leads to the second core insight of the book: how political structures, governance, and leadership shape the response to catastrophic events and influence outcomes. Second core idea: the role of politics, governance, and leadership in catastrophe. Niall Ferguson emphasizes that disasters are not just natural or accidental events, they're also tests of political structures, institutional capacity, and leadership effectiveness. How a society responds to a catastrophe is largely determined by the quality of governance and the decisions made under pressure. 1. Leadership matters. Ferguson illustrates through historical examples that decisive, informed, and morally courageous leadership can drastically reduce the impact of disasters. Conversely, poor leadership, marked by indecision, denial, or self-interest, can magnify harm, even in relatively minor crises. 2. Institutional preparedness. Strong institutions with clear procedures, redundancy, and flexibility are better equipped to handle unexpected events. Ferguson notes that nations with rigid, inefficient, or underfunded institutions often fail to protect citizens or manage recovery effectively. 3. Politics and decision-making. Political agendas often interfere with crisis management. Short-term thinking, partisan priorities, and fear of public backlash can prevent leaders from taking necessary but unpopular actions, leading to preventable damage. 4. Coordination and communication. Ferguson stresses that effective communication within government and between authorities and the public is critical. Miscommunication, confusion, or misinformation during crises can exacerbate panic and slow response efforts. For viewers, the takeaway is clear. The human response to catastrophe is as important as the catastrophe itself. Political will, ethical leadership, and institutional robustness determine whether societies survive, adapt, and rebuild, or succumb to avoidable devastation. This second core idea sets the stage for the third core insight of the book, the historical patterns of catastrophes and the recurring mistakes and successes that define how humans cope with crises. Third core idea: historical patterns of catastrophes and lessons learned. In Doom, Niall Ferguson demonstrates that while each catastrophe may appear unique, there are recurring patterns in human response throughout history. By studying these patterns, we can understand why some societies recover and thrive, while others collapse or suffer prolonged damage. 1. Repetition of mistakes. Ferguson shows that societies often repeat the same errors, ignoring early warnings, underestimating risks, over-relying on fragile systems, and failing to coordinate responses effectively. Historical examples, from pandemics to financial crises, reveal that human behavior, rather than the disaster itself, often magnifies harm. 2. Successful responses. Conversely, there are clear examples where proactive planning, decisive leadership, and institutional foresight minimized damage. Ferguson highlights cases where foresight, preparedness, and adaptive governance allowed societies to withstand severe crises. 3. The role of learning. One of Ferguson's key points is that history provides a blueprint if studied carefully. Societies that institutionalize lessons from past catastrophes through improved policies, infrastructure, and education tend to fare better in subsequent crises. 4. Socioeconomic inequality and vulnerability. Ferguson also notes that disasters disproportionately affect the most vulnerable populations. Socioeconomic structures, healthcare access, and social inequality often determine who suffers the most and who recovers fastest. For viewers, the takeaway is powerful. While we cannot prevent all catastrophes, we can shape our response by learning from history, improving institutions, and making ethical and informed decisions. Recognizing historical patterns allows us to anticipate challenges, mitigate risks, and enhance resilience. This naturally leads to the fourth core insight of the book: how cognitive biases, risk perception, and human psychology influence our ability to respond effectively to crises. Fourth core idea: cognitive biases, risk perception, and human psychology in crises. Niall Ferguson emphasizes that disasters are as much psychological and social phenomena as they are physical events. How humans perceive risk, process information, and make decisions under pressure can determine whether a catastrophe is mitigated or worsened. 1. Cognitive biases. Ferguson highlights common human biases such as denial, over-optimism, and hindsight bias, which lead individuals and governments to underestimate threats or misinterpret warnings. These biases can delay action and increase vulnerability. 2. Public perception and panic. Human behavior during crises is influenced by fear, rumor, and social contagion. Ferguson shows that misinformation, mass panic, or misplaced trust in authority can exacerbate the impact of disasters. 3. Risk mismanagement. People often misjudge probabilities and consequences, focusing on dramatic but unlikely events while ignoring slow-moving or complex threats. This misalignment between perception and reality contributes to ineffective preparedness and response. 4. Leadership and psychology. Leaders themselves are not immune to cognitive biases. Ferguson argues that understanding the psychology of decision-making, both for the public and policymakers, is crucial for designing effective interventions and reducing the human toll of catastrophes. For viewers, the takeaway is clear. Understanding human psychology is as important as understanding the disaster itself. By recognizing cognitive biases, anticipating behavioral responses, and designing policies that account for human tendencies, societies can respond more effectively, save lives, and reduce long-term damage. This sets the stage for the fifth core insight of the book: how societies can build resilience and prepare for future catastrophes by combining historical lessons, governance, and psychological insight. Fifth core idea: building societal resilience for future catastrophes. In Doom, The Politics of Catastrophe, Niall Ferguson concludes by emphasizing that while disasters cannot always be prevented, societies can be better prepared, more resilient, and capable of reducing damage. Resilience is achieved through a combination of historical insight, strong governance, and understanding human behavior. Learning from history, Ferguson argues that societies must systematically study past disasters, identifying mistakes and successes. Institutional memory and historical knowledge are crucial tools for anticipating future crises and avoiding repeated errors. Strengthening institutions. Well-structured, flexible, and responsive institutions capable of rapid decision-making and coordination form the backbone of resilience. Ferguson shows that robust institutions save lives and protect economies during disasters. Preparedness and contingency planning. Effective disaster management relies on planning, training, and resource allocation. Ferguson stresses that preparedness is not static. It must evolve with emerging threats, technological change, and social dynamics. Incorporating human psychology. Policies must account for how people think, perceive risk, and react under stress. Ferguson highlights that ignoring human tendencies, panic, denial, or misjudgment can render even the most sophisticated plans ineffective. Ethics and leadership. Leadership guided by ethical responsibility ensures that policies prioritize the most vulnerable, make transparent decisions, and maintain public trust during crises. Ferguson shows that moral and competent leadership is a key differentiator between successful and failed responses. For viewers, the takeaway is profound. Catastrophes are inevitable, but their impact can be managed and mitigated. By learning from the past, strengthening institutions, understanding human behavior, and practicing ethical leadership, societies can reduce suffering, recover faster, and adapt to an uncertain future. This completes the core analysis of Doom, The Politics of Catastrophe, highlighting the nature of human vulnerability in disasters, the critical role of politics, governance, and leadership, historical patterns of catastrophic events, cognitive biases and psychological factors affecting responses, and strategies for building resilience and preparing for future crises. Conclusion. Doom, The Politics of Catastrophe by Niall Ferguson offers a compelling exploration of why societies succeed or fail in the face of disasters. Ferguson demonstrates that catastrophes are not just natural events, they are shaped by human decisions, political structures, and societal behavior. By examining historical case studies, he shows how leadership, institutional strength, and public psychology determine whether a disaster becomes a tragedy or a managed crisis. The book highlights several key lessons. Disasters reveal human vulnerability, institutional weaknesses, and the consequences of cognitive biases. Effective responses rely on strong governance, ethical leadership, historical awareness, and careful preparation. Ferguson also stresses that learning from past failures and successes is crucial to building resilience for future crises. For viewers, the takeaway is both urgent and empowering. While disasters are inevitable, their impact can be mitigated through informed decision-making, strategic planning, and collective responsibility. Understanding the politics of catastrophe allows us to anticipate challenges, strengthen societies, and protect lives when crises strike. If you are ready to explore the forces behind historical disasters, understand the interplay of politics and human behavior, and learn how to prepare for the unexpected, subscribe to Read and Rise, support the channel, and join us as we uncover books that reveal the patterns of history and the lessons they hold for our future. Because to survive and even thrive in a world of uncertainty, we must learn from the past, plan wisely, and act decisively.